Glad you could join. It's been, I think, ages I've been trying to get everybody on the
I
same experiment.
know, right? So true.
Really sorry. I've been trying to juggle a lot of things and I couldn't reply very quickly.
No problem. Yeah, I totally understand. I totally understand. But I'm glad we were able to finally do this.
You know. How are you? How are you?
Good. It's been an interesting, I would say, what, 2 years now, like right since we hit the pandemic,
Yeah.
and all of us are trying to stay sane, and as I think is true with most non-profits, we are all trying to stay
Mm.
relevant, trying to make sure that we don't die out, and the never-ending cycles. But yeah, I think we've seen the pandemic, we have survived it out. We've done some new
Nice.
interesting things. So yeah, it keeps us excited.
That's amazing. I'm all ears to start. So we'll get started. Are you all
Yeah.
settled?
Yes.
Okay, great. So I'm just hitting go live. Yeah. Okay. So, welcome everyone to our podcast. Today we have with us Megha Bhagat, who is the founder of Project Defy, co founder of Project Defy, which is an organization that is focused on democratizing education. And I think like this is like the third or fourth episode I'm doing focusing on education because I understand it's so essential and how we really need to fix all of the problems that we know exist in our current education system and to nip it right at the bud. What I really love about Defy is the concept of nooks, and I've been following them for like right from the start when they started because I know Mega for some time, and they have this concept of nooks where they everybody regardless of their age is enrolled and they have hands-on. I mean, everything is hands-on. Like they are given transistors, they're given computers to work with and build and break, and it's an amazing way to learn any concept. If you ask me, like I was a nerd in school, and I really don't know why I was cramming up all the history. So I am in love with this entire concept, and I'm really happy that Megha has finally joined us, and I'm excited to hear all about it. So right from the co-founder herself. So thank you for joining us, Megha. Thank you so much. Hello.
From you, you're in. I can hear you now. My video obviously is round, but yeah, I'm losing you a bit in between. So, oh, you're on mute now. So,
Hi. Am I
yeah,
audible now?
yes,
Yeah,
yes,
so
yes.
to begin with, could you begin with giving our listeners a quick flashback to what was the moment when you realized like you have to start this organization? I know you've been part of a lot of educational social causes and you've been part of a lot of movements on what's right and what's inclusive. But when did education catch your attention?
Sure. So, for me, I think education and the way it is working and is currently functional has always been on the mind. And that's probably got a lot to do with my own personal experiences. So, just like I think most of us, I went to the traditional school system, university system. And the one thing that happened to me that I think also happens to a lot of young people is that I didn't fit in. Now, what that means really is that what the schools propagate to teach us, right? What the schools think are the skills we should have, but not necessarily aligned with what I wanted to do, right? So, uh, for me, I was more of a creative person. I loved. I could spend like my whole time in libraries and just gorging on those books, the stories. And yet what it seemed like is that if I didn't have the algebra algorithms figured perfect, I wasn't necessarily a good kid, right? Marks and how you score in examinations became the only way I was being assessed, right? And I remember way back in 11th grade, when I was transitioning from 10th grade to 11th grade, and I told my family, I told my teachers that, you know what, I don't think I'm meant to study sciences. And I really think I want to become a lawyer. I want to study the law, the legal system, because just that interests me more. And I was just told that, but and this I'm talking way back in the 90s, right? And I was just told that, that's not what you should be doing. And I was shoved into the science stream, and I just struggled through my high school. I struggled, really finding a place in the world simply because the system had decided for me of what fitting in the world meant, right? It did not care about what I felt I could do. It did not care about what interested me. It did not care about any of that. And I think I've carried that on. I think it's for young people, their foundations come from there, right? Of how you were treated as an economic asset in the future and not necessarily a human being right then and there, right?
Yeah.
So that played out for me. I fought literally a war, I will say, to go to law school, to be able to pursue legal studies. And then I fought a bigger war to study human rights as my specialization. And this is interesting that in a university of we were an affiliated college to a university. There are about 700 students enrolled that year in law, and I was the only student that wanted to pursue human rights. And I had a system turn back to me and tell me that why, you should just study whatever everybody else is studying, because hey, in the larger schematics of things, it didn't matter. And I think that always dictated my choices. So I went into this development sector, into social impact sector, simply because I think I was fundamentally frustrated with the way the education system and therefore the market system really looked at an individual as somebody who's either useful for the market or is not, right? And that's
Right.
it, right? There's nothing else. And so back in 2014, I of course graduated from my master's, and I did a bunch of different things, which were in the development sector. And then I was working with young girls, trying to get them excited about building technology tools to solve problems. And then back in 2014, I met my co-founder Abhijit, young, passionate man right out of university. He was brand new out of university, and his frustration was exactly the same, right? Which was that universities and schools don't give us anything. But he was braver than I, and he actually started experimenting with the first ever model of Nook in a village outside Bangalore. And,
Oh.
and we met at a conference, and we started talking, and we just realized that both of us were really thinking about it, about the problem from the same lens. And that's when I was like, okay, this is what, here is someone who is actually attempting an experiment to say, if this current oppressive educational system has to go, what can replace it, right?
Yeah.
And therefore we got together back in 2014, started experimenting in that village a little more. We built out the experiment a little more, and that's actually where Defy started and began his journey back all those years ago. Where in a small village, where in a room with just some tools, donated laptops, and a borrowed internet connection, we got people together and said, let's see what comes out of it, right? And that's where the story begins for us.
That's amazing. I think 2015 is when I met you, and when you were advocating STEM, like how technology is the right place, and
Yeah.
That's where I met you for the conference, GHI conference. Wow, I didn't know this was something you were already working on that time. Amazing. So, is Project Defy registered as an organization, NGO, or a school? Like, what is the category that it falls under?
So we are a non-profit organization. So
Mm-hmm.
we are registered here in India. We're about 4 years old now, and yeah, and we work across the globe as a non-profit.
Wow. So, where else other than India do you have nooks that are functional? And are they physically, are they running even now?
Yes. So interestingly, outside India, our nukes have been able to open up. So we've set up ourselves in Rwanda. We're just coming up in Uganda. We are in Zimbabwe at 2 locations,
Wow.
and we've just recently also set up a nuke in Bangladesh. So that's where we are globally. Our nukes outside have been able to get up and running at least in the past 7 months outside the country. And in India, of course, the reality is that we had to close down the spaces and pivot to mobile learning program.
Nice. So, do you have apps, or like, could you just explain how do you function, like in a Nook once a person is registered? How does
Sure.
it go by? Yeah.
Sure. So the Nook is actually a physical space. It's about 1,000 square feet of a space inside a marginalized community. The one data point that stays same for us of wherever we go is that we work with severely marginalized communities, whether socially, economically, historically, right? So we take a 1,000 feet square space and we power it up with basic tech, which is about 10 laptops, one internet connection, a bunch of initial tools. So, Arduinos on one side, art and craft on the other side, drills on the other side, carpentry stuff also in the same room. So, a bunch of very different, interesting things that come up, right? And then we open it up to the community. And what we do initially is when we invite people in, we sit down with them and we actually do a very deep dive conversation on, if you didn't have all these restrictions of poverty, of gender, of all of that, what would you really do? Right? And I don't know how many of teachers or school systems ask this question, right?
Nobody.
I'm sure they ask you, what do you want to become in the future, right? But that question is very aligned to which corporate wants you for what, right? It's
Actually.
right. So we go through this huge deep dive process of people when they start coming in and they start seeing these things that are there, right? So the space from a design lens has been designed to interest and to excite initial curiosity, right? And curiosity is something that never dies, right? You will see it in a 61-year-old grandmother and you will see it in a 7-year-old young boy, right? And when they see these materials, they start coming in, they're hesitant to touch it initially. And so while they're exploring all this, we start setting up conversations with them, right? And we start really getting into, tell me, what would you choose to do? Don't tell me what your parents want you to do. Don't tell me what when you were younger, your dad and mom wanted you to do, or your husband wanted you to do. But tell me, what do you really think you want to be doing for yourself? And that leads to people actually taking a breath and actually thinking for themselves. So what changes there is that suddenly the choice is back in their hands, right? It's about their agency now, right? And the thing about agency is that you can't palpably, really say that this is how it changed, but what you start seeing is the shifts that start coming in the space. So once they tell us what they're really excited about doing, we try to have them break it down into milestones, right? So I'm a young girl and I want to be a radio jockey, right? Now, how do you become a radio jockey, correct? So then the girl herself breaks it down into milestones for herself,
Mhm.
right? And you can
Wow.
take different paths to be a radio jockey. You can absolutely go to a college and learn to be a radio jockey, solely, absolutely legit. You can go on YouTube and learn diction, tone, lighting, script writing, and also build the skills in the pathway to be an RJ, right? You can also
Nice.
talk to people who are RJs and find them on the internet and kind of shadow them and figure out how to do one, right? So there's so many different ways you can, right? So when they
Nice.
do this and they start thinking for themselves, then they build for themselves what we call project goals. And project goals are usually 3 months in duration, in which they complete something. So what that connects to is a huge sense of accomplishment, right? It's especially for these communities that are constantly traditionally being told that they're not good enough, that they're only meant for certain jobs, they're only meant for certain things in life. 3 months achieving a goal shifts in their head what is known as the creative block and the accomplishment cycle, right? So they break down their milestones in different projects
Wow.
and they start working on those projects, right? So and all of this is being done on the internet. So the idea was to say that if internet has actually democratized information, then let's make it real, right? Then actually it should not require a teacher. It should not require a volunteer. Also, it does not require what is known as, people should be given a pathway and all of that because people are smart. Everybody is inherently smart. We humans. We are born to survive. So that survival gene kicks in and you start seeing people go on internet, they start finding information, they start working on their projects, and then something else changes, which is now there's no teacher, there's the internet, but there's something else that the Nook has, right, which is all these people from their community, right? And that is when they start collaborating. So
Wow.
suddenly I don't have to compete with my peer, I suddenly have to collaborate, right? Because that's the only way I'll succeed. And that's where we start seeing magic happen. We start seeing 60-year-old women start learning how to play a guitar from like a 11, 12-year-old boy, or or they start building, or they start looking at goals like I want to build an electric car, and I'll do it with these bunch of young boys who study science, and I'll do it with them, right?
Nice.
And then we start seeing those things
Wow.
happen. So very focused goals, smart goals, uh, hands-on project-based learning, but very intuitively connected to at every stage. Is this your choice? Is this what you are going for and gunning for? And that is a constant principle. The Nook doesn't have a graduation period, doesn't have a
Just
graduating with a certificate, right? The Nook is a community space. Um, Anybody can keep coming back to it when they want to. There are no set timings for them to come. You can come when you want to learn. You can learn a bunch of things, go out there and see if they work for you. If they don't, then come back again and learn again and do whatever learning you want to do again, and then go back out again. So it's essentially community self-directed learning.
amazing. I mean, you've gotten down the best of all the possible worlds there. I think uh, being like going to schools where actually you have these facilitators and teachers, nobody ever asks you what is your choice and what you would want to do.
Yeah,
That's number one. And nobody ever tells you that the person next to you is not a competitor but a collaborator. Like that never happens. The first thing
exactly.
that I think, you go to any professional college, you'll be like, the person to your left, the person to your right, they're all your competitors. You better get the job
Exactly.
before they do. Oh my
Correct.
god, you've literally solved like I don't know how many chunks of the problem, like right from the starting till the end. That's amazing. So, tell me this: like, how do you measure the success? And obviously, I think the success of the program is when the person has built something or learned, finished learning a guitar. But when it says like when somebody is wanting to become their first goal at the beginning of the 3 months was to become something, do you evaluate that at the end of 3 months and then set new goals, or does anybody pivot and find another goal?
Yeah, they do. They do. So, how we measure success is from like a lot of different lens. So, at a community lens, we measure success from how many of the learners from the NUC have gone out and solved community problems, right, that exist. From a space design lens, we measure success from to how many people the space feels like a safe learning space for them and helps them grow. From an individual learner lens, we look at the number of different kind of projects that a learner is building, right? Which gives us also insights into a lot of different things in which they're building their skill sets. People absolutely change goals, pivot goals, and move on to something else. And I'll tell you something interesting that we learned about this phenomenon, by the way. Traditional schools, especially for young kids, right? You go to school today as young as 2.5, 3, right? And then you're put on this standardized template that there is math or science or geography or history, whatever. You have to complete this one full curriculum, right? And periods are around it, right? That 1 hour of sitting and just this. What they do take into cognizance is that young children do not have that kind of an attention span. And therefore, for a young child, the motivation is to see something work and then move to something else. All right. And that is how young children learn. They don't learn from becoming specialist at one thing. They don't. They
Absolutely.
actually learn moving from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 in quick succession of times because their attention span is focused on making something quickly work, right?
Yeah.
So we see that and we learned that ourselves through the notes that young people, will pick up something, they'll quickly figure out, okay, this is how it works, this is how I can build a quick mini robot, right? And then they want to move on to
Something
in the
else.
next full cycle draw something, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And the next full cycle go and build a stool, right? In the next so and that is actually how learning should be taking place, especially for young people, right? So we don't necessarily mark success as you see this is your goal, you go ahead and really achieve it because that again has to be their choice, right? That again has to be individualized, contextualized, right? And it's very easy for me to say actually that, oh, what, adults actually pick up one goal and then they finish it and then they reach here, right? But that also is not true because for adults, when they actually are given a free space and actually start looking at the possibilities that exist, right? And they start exploring through project based learning of what these possibilities are, right? It's directed by their own curiosity, and you start seeing that they also pick up different goals because suddenly low hanging fruits are not that enticing and they want to push their boundaries, they want to push for things that traditionally schools were not letting them, right? So
Yeah.
for us, we do see pivots in goals. We see new goals picked up. We see actually goals across themes being picked up, right? And none of that is problematic for us at all at any point. Because the idea,
Amazing.
the vision always is to learn how to learn and not learn with a outcome that is again dictated by what job will you get with this tomorrow or what employment will you get with this tomorrow, right? But it's very focusedly driven from were you able to actually deep dive into yourself and explore everything that you think your mind is really able to explore for yourself.
Amazing. So it's like an entirely customizable curriculum
Yes.
to the person. That's amazing. So do you have do you have neurologist or anybody that you consult on understanding these patterns, or like, did you research on a child's attention span like before starting this, or on your job as the founder? Like, do you go ahead and understand what does it actually take to explain something to a adult versus a child?
So honestly, no. I think we're very early in the game to kind of bring in that layer of understanding with neurologists and learning professionals. We've not done that. I think we will only attempt that and go into that kind of research when we scale, and we scale significantly, and we have more data points to do that. But I think a lot of our early learnings have come from the fact that we were very experimental in the first 4 years. So between 14 and 16, we started early 14. We registered an organization only towards the end of 16. And we spent close to 4 years just constantly experimenting with the model itself, right? So what
Right.
happens there is that we were able to see these early patterns emerge right there. Because the Nook for us also was not a set in stone space right from day one. We're very aware that Nooks itself will shape figure will change, and what happens in it will change. And I think that's why we were able to really see these patterns emerge. That for young children, the attention span is very driven by how creative the project is for them, whereas for adults, it's initially very driven by an outcome of where can this lead me to, and but that can be, and that changes when you put an adult and a child in the same room, right? And I think a lot of our early data sets came because the space is age agnostic, right? And therefore adults break down a lot of their walls of understanding of themselves, and they see a young child just being curious, right? And just wanting to shift from one thing to the other. And then the adult is suddenly like, why am I suddenly focused on just one thing? Whereas I think I can learn if I build maybe 4 or 5 things, you know.
Right.
So I think a lot of our early analysis has happened because we kept the nuke not a static place, but we kept it to be a very figure form changing space.
Amazing. So, tell me about some of the initiatives that are going on currently. Like, I think from 2014 till 2020, there's been a lot of new things that have come up. I think I remember seeing Dash, a banner of that for ethical hacking. So, like, how do you bring in these new ideas, or like, let's start teaching this, or let's give them the tools that they need to learn a new hot trend right now? How does that go by?
So programs at Defy have always been created from the same vision that we will continue to innovate and will continue to relook at how marginalized communities create their solutions, and keeping democratic values at the core of it, right? So for the first, I would say, like until 2000, early 2018, we stuck to the model of nukes with marginalized communities, going into the communities and setting up these spaces. Right, then 18 is when we said, okay, let's experiment with, can we do something similar with university students? Right, because in our understanding, I think university students are far more marginalized. Like, they definitely have no choice in what they do, and we attempted that in across 6 universities across India, right?
Wow.
And we set up 6 spaces and did that for about 3 years with our partners. And from there emerged an understanding of, yes, university students also need such spaces. And from there emerged what you see today is Dash, which is, an 8-week boot camp for university students across India who join the program over 8 weeks and across 2 tracks with the same tenets of problem solving, right? So one track focuses on really for somebody who's absolutely passionate about solving a problem but doesn't know where to start, right? And unfortunately, university labs don't promote that, correct? They would rather that you finish your experiment and like move on to the next one. So the learning track, which we call Solvenger, focuses really on anybody who has an idea and doesn't know what to do with it to come into the program, pick up principles like design thinking, pick up principles like problem solving, root cause analysis, and go. And when they exit the 8 weeks, they would have a prototype ready of whatever problem they came in with, right? And the second track, the pitchers track, is more focused on university students, but who've taken a step ahead, which is they've created a prototype. They kind of think they want to start their own enterprises, and the enterprise can be anything. It can be a non-profit, it can be a collective, it can be anything. And they want more training in that. So over 8 weeks, then they get trained on, how do you go from prototype to MVP? How do you go from MVP to knowing what kind of enterprise should you really have? Because there's also this thing, right? Look at the way market dictates thing, right? So all you hear anywhere is the concept of startups, right? But the only
Okay.
thing that you hear about startups is these for-profit startups, right? Nothing else, right? But how do we change that? How do we get students to think of other ways of solving problems in the world? And that's how Dash emerged, honestly, to see if we can work with university students also, and get them excited about problem solving. In fact, we've opened up the applications for Dash. We're inviting university students to join and have a fun time, 8 weeks. But again, collaboration. Everybody gets to team up. Everybody gets to have access to not just the mentors that the program provides, but more importantly, to this whole group of incredible people that will come together, right? So that's how Dash happened. Last year, when the pandemic hit, we also went back to the whiteboard and said, how do communities get self-reliant when it comes to
Yeah.
disasters, right?
Absolutely.
And this came from a question we were asking ourselves, because we were also leading relief work for our communities, and it came from a very, very philosophical question we asked ourselves, that how is it that we, the outsiders, decide for that community what help should be given and how that help should be given to them, right? How is it that we dictate it, and why is it that we dictate it, right? And that's how a new program was born. It's called Dispec, where we're trying to reimagine disaster resilience within marginalized communities. Um, Again, we're very my co-founder is an engineer, right? So all problems that we solve are broken down into chunks, right? So we've broken it down into segments, trying to pilot different segments, and then put it together as a package, and and then see if we can give it off to communities and they can take it, run with it, contextualize it. This actually is interesting for us because it's a first open source program. So we're inviting other organizations to come with us. We're
Wow.
inviting different organizations to partner with us on this and build out these segments with us. So we don't want to be the SMEs on this at all. All we want to do is build out a whole package together and pass it on to the communities. So
Nice.
yeah, I think the core fundamentals remain same. That we will work with marginalized communities. We will work on self resilience. We will work on them coming up with the solutions. What we will do is really facilitate some of those building blocks and then move on and then exit that
Nice.
whole scenario.
That's nice. It's actually nice to. Being an engineer myself, I really love the way you had broken it down to 3 months right from the beginning, and how you mentioned that same approach is being used to break down any problem. That's nice. Helps you relate to this, and I think when you started doing this, like it reminds me of how I don't know why we don't do this. Every college has access to everybody has access to MIT source their education. The way Harvard runs their classrooms, we have access to all of these great institutions that we look up to in the way they actually run their classrooms.
Yeah.
But what is stopping us from copying that, or emulating from them the way actually a good classroom or good case study it can be studied? Or I mean, the way we right now run is, it's a one way, it's like a radio. There's hardly any discussion that comes forward. What you have done is like a huge feat altogether. But on a general note, like, what do you think is stopping us from changing the existing schools right now?
So I think we have to be very cognizant of the history of education for that, right? The
Mm-hmm.
history of education is actually only 400-year old, and it was started in the industrialization period. It was started to build factories, right? I am quick anecdote. I don't know if you know this. Do you know why are children segregated according to age group in the school system and the university system?
No, 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 no.
Because the first school that ever began was during the factory era, and you needed to segregate people based on age so you could segregate what work they could really do in the factory. And that is the foundation of our education system, by the way. All right.
Okay.
So, so,
Explain
so
to
we
that.
carry, right? So, especially the developing nations are carrying the burden of that system that was passed down to us, right? We were passed down that education system of really segregating people, of putting people in rooms and just factory milling them to be prepared for corporate jobs, right? Only their factory jobs, not their corporate jobs, right? So there is this huge, I think, legacy burden that we carry, especially in countries like ours, where reimagining it means actually first acknowledging the burden of this legacy of colonialism, right? And saying that the system came from somebody else and it was thrusted on us. And sure, it looked like it's a fabulous thing to have, but it's not, right? And then it needs to really look at how is it functioning now, which you can't necessarily do until you've made you reconcile with the fact that the system was not even meant for us, right?
Yeah.
So I think that is why what we are seeing in education, whether it is NEP, whether it is RTE, are these tweaks in the system, right? What we start seeing is layering. You know what I mean? Like,
Building on
in
top of that.
school, yeah, schools don't work. Hey, all right, let's build in happiness curriculum, right? Just the language of it doesn't bother us anymore, right? Oh, university kids are not creative enough. Okay, let's set up maker spaces, right? Again, an imported concept, right? It came from America to us, right? The number of fab labs that are going around in the country, right, which serve zero purpose, right? So I think it's because somewhere the we haven't really been brave enough to take that risk of saying, can we go to the wide world and first acknowledge that the system is broken? You can't fix it. It's not fixable. It has to be replaced. And for it to be replaced, you have to then acknowledge the fact that India is still a country that is the outsourced destination for work, right? We still have more young people working in BPOs than we have people who are
Yeah.
building solutions for the world, right? So I think that is why how the market has reinforced this onto us. The layering of economic parameters that the global economy has shoved onto us, right, percolates to this level where we have not been able to break out of our growth of saying that we are at a stage where we should now question this. And a lot of it has to do with your GDP, right? It has to do with the fact that we still have larger percentage of our population living under poverty line. What if that doesn't change? Then your only system you can see is that poor kids are given one meal at a school, right? And that's how you think you retain them. So we've not questioned the legacy of it. Until you question the legacy of it, you cannot at all create a new solution. You will only fix the leaks that you think are leaks, right? Which which are not giving you more data points and instead putting you in a loop of constantly layering solution over solution over solution, right? Which then just become kids get more burdened with like more stuff that they have to do and accomplish, right? And that's where we stuck at.
True. I mean, talking with you now, I feel as if Gurukulam was better suited for India. Like, at least there was a one thing was good for us. Like, it was, I think, not more than 10 or 8 or 10 people with one teacher, and they went on to a journey of finding themselves out first, like that know thyself was one of the first things they did. Something that you start your nooks with on like what is important to you. This part, I think we in the rush of copying the West, I think we've just let go of our own original schooling system.
And it wasn't even copied from the West. Remember, we were colonized. Remember that the first Montessori was brought by the Britishers, right? So remember, it's not even copying. So that's the misnomer where we try to say we copy the West. The fact of the matter is, things were thrusted on us as a colonized nation. And most colonized nations still have the same system of education, by the way, right? And the only thing that they've not been able to do post independence, most of these nations, is that reimagine it for themselves, right? Because also, when these nations got independent, the focus obviously became on getting economically stable, on getting all of these things going, right? And therefore, this became like, okay, this is still working in some way of fashion, let it keep going, right? Till it becomes this massive problem. And I think most colonized nations across the globe have this passed down system and have not been able to innovatively look back and scratch off the system and create something new, just because it was something that was thrusted on them and they kept going with it. So that's what I'm saying, the legacy of colonization has a lot to do with it.
Got it. So when you started this, I believe this is your first entrepreneurial role. Like, correct me if I'm wrong. Like, did you like when you started this? Did you reach out to any of your family and friends who have done something in a like a business side before this? Was how was the journey
No,
from?
I'm a first time entrepreneur, first generation entrepreneur in the family. I come from a very traditional family set. I have family in the military, so we come from a very institutionalized government background. My whole family serves the military, and yeah, I was just supposed to be on a very set path of probably becoming a lawyer and all of that. So there was no data points to go back to in the family at all. So I say this, I think folks like us are accidental entrepreneurs. I don't think we set out to be entrepreneurs, to be very honest. I don't think the vision ever was, I'm going to set up this legacy non-profit, and that is the legacy. The organization was never considered the legacy. That's why we didn't even register for 3 years. I think we only registered because it became like this. We just had to, we couldn't take funds anymore in our account, and then we had advisors who were like, guys, you really need an organization. So for me as an entrepreneur, I say this, that I don't think either of us set out to be entrepreneurs. I think both of us set out to be problem solvers, and we were very keen on solving this problem. And Defy as an organization is a vehicle to do that. And we are hoping we can shut it down in the next 10-15 years and move on and solve other problems and pass on whatever the Moocs can do to more partners, more organizations on the ground, and just pass it on. But yeah, I think as an entrepreneur, no, I didn't have anybody in the friend family circle to go to. Everything was learned on the ground. I think till today we learn everything on the ground, and every lesson is a new lesson, and you're just like, damn, I should have seen that coming. And then you don't, and then you're just like, okay, well, sure, it goes into that book of things not to do, and so I think it's the same journey that every first generation entrepreneur has, which is all your lessons are on on the work
The job.
and with everything that you're doing.
So speaking on that note, like what would be your like top three challenges ever since you started this? I think you've come a long way from where it was just an experiment to I think it's you've reached more than 2000. Sorry,
Yep.
is it like like you've reached more than 3,000, 8,000. I see the counter running on your website for how many people you've impacted. So I was trying to understand like what were your challenges as a I think you went from an advisor role and now it's the like you kept changing roles within Defy as well. So how
Yeah.
was a small flashback and what were your top three challenges?
Yeah, sure. You're right. So I actually joined Abhijit in his journey as somebody who was funding the first move, to be very fair. And I was very excited about it. And I was like, I can bring in the initial set of funds and do that. And then in 16 took a call of saying, okay, let me do this full time and get started. So I think few challenges was, one was just acceptance of the idea, right? I realized that as much as the sector or the industry talks about innovation, it doesn't necessarily want innovation. It just wants replication of existing ideas. And so to push through that, I think was the biggest challenge. It still remains the biggest challenge, to be honest. And I think we just making peace with it comes with a little more maturity in the game, I would say. But definitely acceptance of the fact that we were not going to give you better literacy numbers, or we were not going to give you people who read better or write better, but fundamentally looking at questioning the whole foundation of education. So just the acceptance of something as radical as that was something we dealt with. Also, the young entrepreneurial ecosystem in the country was growing, was just starting out at that time. So to find that was difficult, was challenging, right? What you have in India are either these very legacy nonprofits, right, who have been existing for 20, 25 years, are considered like, the grandpas of the ecosystem, right? What we didn't have is um, this community of emerging entrepreneurs who really wanted to problem solve. So finding those people, right, finding your tribe, was challenging initially and a little lonely, I would say, in that ways. And just saying that young entrepreneurs don't want to replicate what has existed, but really want to question everything. I think it's gotten a little better with time in India. There are more and more of those coming around. So that's nice to see now. And then, of course, came just the challenges of really figuring how to set up and run an organization. I think that is something that I believe, I hope gets easier for entrepreneurs who follow, because that in itself can be such a dreadful thing to deal with, because there is no template, right? We exist in a country where policies change overnight, where legalities change overnight, where bureaucracy, red tapeism stops you from really pushing ahead. So I think the early years were the real struggle with, like, we don't have a tax exemption certificate. So now how do you really keep working, keep scaling when funding in India is dependent on that, right? So I think as a young nonprofit, just being able to maneuver all of those spaces and to keep all the balls up in the air, I think was one of the biggest challenges that we've faced for sure.
So, talking about policies, how was it? How difficult was it to get started in Zimbabwe and Bangladesh? Like, did you have people who had to? Did you have to go there and find people who would work for Defy, uh, or were they supportive enough? Did you collaborate with NGOs there? What was that like?
So the most interesting part about our journey at Defy has been that the idea has found more resonance outside the country than within the country, and has found amazing support outside the country. So one of the early decisions we took at Defy was that we do not want to set up thousand and thousand of loops under Defy's operations. We want to pass on the knowledge to more and more organizations that are experimenting in the space of education and align with our vision. So we have set up all the nooks outside the country with partners. So we have found grassroots organizations that are very interested in self-directed learning, opening up community spaces to do it, and we've partnered with them. We've brought in funders from our network who are funding these, and that's how we set it up. And that will be the vision going forward, where we are trying to create what we're calling a Nook network, which is a global consortium of partners, which will be funders, grassroots organizations, researchers, all of them coming together to set up moves across the globe. And they will be owned and managed and run by different partners in different locations. so that in about 10 to 15 years we can shut down Defy, because we would have passed on all the knowledge, know-how of doing it to everybody else in the world. So that's how we grew outside, and that has informed also our scale strategy.
It's almost like I'm imagining Avengers Shield being created for the purpose of education.
Exactly.
That's awesome. So, like my final question: what you do so many things, but I know you love poetry and music. So there's this line in the Summer Day poem by Mary Oliver. It says, "Tell me what is it that you plan to do with your one wild and precious life." What would your answer be to that?
Well, I really plan to just use as much of it as to make a difference in the world around me. I really think I may not be able to solve every problem, but I will die knowing that I tried and I gave all it all of my all, and that I attempted to solve some of the problems that exist around me. So I think that is what will always stay for me as the one thing I definitely want to take to my grave.
Thank you so much, Megha. I mean, you have been an inspiration years ago. You still are. I do look up to you, and I'm sure this is going to be one of those inspiring episodes. Thank you so much. All the best for all the work you do.
Thank
Wishing
you.
you all the
Thank you so
success.
much. Thank you so much for having me over. This was super exciting. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right.
Yeah.